Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we are going to be looking at the sound Killer Ladybugs, the bass sound. This was a request. Someone said, yo, how do you make that sound? So this is it. It is a metamorphosis bass. It goes through a lot of changes. A lot of people might think maybe they're different sounds, but it's actually the same sound with just some automation and some clever use of phase. So let's go ahead. I'll play it for you real quick. Okay, and then if we come over here, this bass right here, it's the most aggressive part of this sort of bass line. And then it transforms back into that plucky bass that you heard before. So I'm going to really quick show you this. It can also become this in 3, 2, 1. So pretty cool. And then it goes on changing throughout the song, creating the interest that this bass is. So I really am a big fan of things like this. It lets the sound really shine when you see it change. You have this sort of aesthetic like, oh, wow, this is a really cool thing, and it's becoming something new. And that's really a powerful thing to have in a track. So let's talk about how to make this sound. So the sound is based on the principle of the manipulation of unison phase. It's a pretty cool thing you can do in Harmor. A lot of other plugins will support it if they have additive features. And some of them, even without additive features, can still reproduce this using chorus. So let's really quick talk about what's going on. So I'm accomplishing the timbral changes of the sound, meaning the way the sound changes over time, by manipulating the unison phase, the frequency, and the pluck. So how long the sound is, how many frequencies are allowed in the song, and the relationship of phase to the different voices of the sound. So that sounds kind of crazy. Let's go ahead and open up a Harmor and I will show you what I mean. So I'm going to focus mostly on the concept of the sound rather than like recreating that exact sound. You'll get something similar according to this. So I have now opened up a default Harmor. I'm going to turn the volume down because Harmor is loud. And we're going to go to the unison. Now, the unison, Harmor generates a voice, right? And these voice has all these harmonics. If we look at it, like here are all the harmonics. And so when I turn on the unison, it creates a duplicate of these harmonics. And it varies a couple settings about this. So right now, when it's off, there's just one voice, just the harmonics you see here. And they come out according to the settings I have. So the stereo image, all that stuff is determined by these settings. But I can duplicate all this by a certain number of times. So I'm going to duplicate it 4 times. And so now there are 4 voices. Now it'll only show you 1 over here, but there's actually 4 now, 4 sets of these things going on. And I'm able to change the panning of each voice. So that'll immediately give me a stereo image. And then I'm also able to change the pitch offset. So they each will have a little bit of variation in pitch. And that creates this sort of, if you think big room lead sound, that's what this basically is. So the detuned lead sound, and then I could have them be the same. At this point, it's basically all just one voice, and this is sort of a waste. But it could be useful if we're going to automate this. We're going to keep this down low. We're not really going to use this. So I like it pretty low. And then what creates an interesting thing is this phase. So these 4 voices are phase locked, meaning every time I play the notes, it's going to sound the same. And I'm able to, and of course there's the phase control up here that does that's a whole nother story. We're going to ignore that for now. We don't use that in this sound. What we're going to do is, because this thing has to do with like Harmor as a global scope, this has to do with the phase between the 4 voices. So we have these 4 clones and they all start at the same point. But if we were to change this point, then that will change the sound dramatically, because now you're going to be having different frequencies summing in different ways at different times if we were to automate. So if I were to move this around while playing a note, we notice we get this pretty big shift in timbre. It's like, wow, that's quite the change. And that's because we're changing where these starting points are. And now this is a static phase relationship. So once it's set up, so once it starts, it's going to sound that way. It sets up a static change. But if we automate this and play new notes while we're playing it, we get this change, and that's that. If you're confused about phase, I have a number of videos. I will try to remember to put them in the description that explain phase quite a bit. But that's the basis of this sound. And we can augment the way this phase change happens by manipulating things like how long each of the frequencies exists. So for example, our pluck knob will cause lower frequencies to last longer than higher frequencies. And this will affect our phase change also. Granted, it's quite a bit more subtle. It's not nearly as effective as when the tones are sustained. The other thing we can control that will manipulate the way our phase change happens is a filter. So there's our sound. If we change our filter, now if we, between our 4 voices that have all been filtered, they're going to sum differently, and this will cause the phase to have a similar feel. But if you listen here, it sort of gets closer to a square wave because there's less harmonics indicating a saw wave. And so now it still hugely sounds like a saw wave, but because higher harmonics are pretty important information for really distinct sound, especially ranges that are specific to speech. So like middle ranges and upper register ranges that allow us to identify words. When you remove those, our perception gets quite a bit more fuzzy. And so we're able to sort of blur the line between various waveforms. Now, so that's a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo, but you see where the general idea of the song is. So all I'm doing is manipulating these things. And if we look at the original patch and we look at here, so we see, oh, okay, so we're starting off. These are the positions. So the pluck is all the way on. If we look at, we'll just watch these knobs move. You will see these 3 knobs moving. So we see our pluck comes up, so the sustain grows out, and so it comes from this like short thing to this long thing. It gets quite a bit brighter. Now this is playing a very important role, especially during the lines just like do 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 do. That dun 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 dun. That is completely dependent on where this phase control is. It just happens to land in a sweet spot that I went through on my unison phase and sort of figured out where it was. And I said, wow, that sounds really cool. It really resonates in a cool way. So I'm going to rock that spot for that particular moment. And that's sort of what you do with a sound like this. You find those spots that sound pretty cool. And I like this because a lot of times people will just generate a lot of crazy sounds. That's something I'll do quite a bit. And then take out the good parts of it and piece it together to form something cool. I like this because every part of the sound can be made to sound cool without having to do a lot of chopping up. So I can write musical rhythms and phrases in actual notes and instead of focusing 100% on sound design. So I can use some theory and some knowledge. And it's quite a rhythmic sound, and I'm able to write in actual rhythms as opposed to chop it up and do a lot of experimenting with just how the audio sounds if you go about it that way. So, okay, cool. So that's how we do that. Now, let's talk about the other effects that are going on. So that's the meat of it. So if you want to just create something similar, just mess with those settings and then throw on some post distortion. So you'll notice that my frequency has been lowered by an octave. That's just a choice of where I wanted to write in the piano roll. My legato is on, and so is my portamento. So I can't play multiple notes. It will slide to the next note. It causes it to do that. That was quite a bit louder than I'd expected because I'm over here. If I start at the beginning. So you see when we have the pluck on, this will cause it to go like the up. If I have these off, they're the same, and that's not really that useful in a sound like this. I can't remember if I changed the time setting, but it looks like I have. Now, if we go into the effects section, I have a reverb. You notice the filters are quite severe. And if you listen, I've been studying a lot of acoustics and sort of getting into upper division math and programming and trying to actually code plugins. So it's been quite my perception of this has gone way up. When you go into a room and you just listen to that room, it really plays a huge role on indication of, it just gives you a particular experience. And so this reverb, I mean, it sounds to me like a cement room. That's what it sounds like. A rather big one because we have that long decay. And so with transient sounds, it's really cool. What's really cool about the reverb with this kind of a sound is the reverb will go away as far as how clear our perception is of it and how clear the sound is as the sound gets longer. And then when it gets back to being short, it's suddenly like the room is there again, but it sounds closer because the short sound typically has, I have my filter all the way up, so it sounds brighter, which is a contradiction to the notion of a bigger space. Typically, when a space gets bigger, your higher frequencies tend to wash away. It's the lower frequencies that hang around. So it's sort of an interesting aesthetic quality that gets brought out. Let me show it to you. So just pay attention to the reverb. Now we're playing quite low notes here too, but pay attention to how the reverb sort of changes as these parameters are affected. Yeah, the reverb's like a whole, we could talk a long time about like the implications of what this is. But in the long run, when you're creating something, just you go ahead, you just make, you know, a cool reverb. So there's a reverb on there. There's some of the ideas that I was like, wow, this is some pretty nifty stuff going on here. I had the compression on. This song was made before I went through the audio program. And before, I mean, I didn't really know about mixing at this point in time when this song was created. So my mixing decisions are kind of terrible, but so I have a compressor on heating. This process may be a little bit different now. I could accomplish a similar thing. Well, anyways, yeah, that's part of the process. If you want this sound, you're going to need to do that. Not really a required thing. It is useful for bringing out the highs, though. So you could accomplish something similar with an EQ. Using a compressor to do it brings along with it a sort of squashed quality. That could be useful because this is the sound design stage. So there's not really any rules on mixing. But I didn't have any mixing rules really to begin with. So there's that's like a whole nother topic. And so let's go over here to distortion. Now I have distortion on. It's on ribbon. How did you choose this? I just scrolled through and turned the amount up, and I picked one that I liked, and this is the one that I liked. So that's as far as that went around. Now I've been showing it to you with the effects. So as you can see here, my knowledge of mixing at this point in time was very apparent. So I'm going to turn these things off and show you just what's going on. The Edison's not doing anything. This was for another experiment that I was doing. And the stereo shaper is a topic we'll discuss in a second. So as we play it without the effects, you notice that it sounds pretty much the same. There's not a whole lot this is doing. So one of the things I have on here is a limiter, and I am using this for a sidechain. So nothing big there. That's just for the kick. And then I have an EQ. The EQ does not move. This was set according to what I thought sounded cool, and that was it. So a boost down here and a cut here. I think I was trying to make it fit with the kick. So I mean, I knew a little bit about stuff, but not a terrible bunch. This isn't really doing anything. This is just part of an experiment. And this is a, what setting do I have this on right now? It's been a long time since I've touched it. But anyways, what it's doing is basically it's changing the stereo image. This is at the point when I like know what this does now, but at the point when I grabbed this, I grabbed it because it uses interesting it changes your stereo image by changing your effects by running it through this routing matrix. It's really cool. So basically what it boils down to is I grab it all the time just for spatial change. So I automate this on and off so we get the natural effect of the natural stereo image that's created by this thing moving around. But then I also give it a different sense of space by altering the way it goes through this mixing chain here, and that alters the stereo image, and it's just a changing stereo image. So in the end, I opened it up, I came in here, I went to effects, and I chose one of these three guys, and then I automated the amount that it's allowed in and out, and that's what this is down here. And so if we listen to it, it comes into effect more or less right here. That's like when it's sort of the effect is the most noticeable. It's a subtle thing. Not really necessary for your sound, but it was more of a mixing move. So I guess I had some mixing moves. So there's just a lot going on spatially wise, because it's like it sounds like it sort of evens out as far as the stereo image is concerned, and then it cuts back down, and it just gives you a different sense of where it sits in the mix. And there's not a whole lot, there's no other sounds really going on. This is the first other sound that happens. And as a result, this just gives you this huge sense of like what this thing is. And so that's how I made this sound. This the process that I went through is what I was thinking of. Nothing too crazy, just automating a couple things. And when you do that and you do it musically, it tends to come out pretty cool. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.